I wasn't eavesdropping. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, until I heard my name. The afternoon sun was hitting the glass of the Willis Tower, reflecting a sharp, golden light across my desk. It's a view I've looked at for nearly 10 years, yet it never really gets old. Chicago has a way of looking different every single hour, depending on the clouds or the way the wind whips off the lake. Some days, the city is a steel blue fortress, cold and unyielding. Other days, like today, it glows with a warmth that feels almost dishonest. I'm 32 now, and sometimes I feel like I've grown up alongside these buildings. I've watched new skyscrapers rise like glass beanstalks, altering the skyline I thought I knew by heart. I work for a mid-sized architectural firm called Sterling & Vance. I'm not an architect myself, I'm a senior project coordinator. I'm the person who makes sure the permits are filed, the contractors are paid, and the delicate egos of the designers stay intact. It's a job of details. I like details. They're predictable. If you follow the steps, you get the result. There is a profound comfort in a well-organized spreadsheet or a permit that clears the city council on the first try. It's a language of logic in a world that often feels chaotic. My office is on the 14th floor. It's a comfortable space, filled with the hum of high-end computers and the occasional scent of expensive espresso from the break room. I have a good life here. I know everyone's birthdays. I know that Marcus in accounting takes his tea with 3 sugars and a splash of almond milk, and I know that our CEO, Arthur Sterling, hides his reading glasses in the top drawer of the hallway credenza whenever he's frustrated, pretending he doesn't need them. They like me here. I'm Elena, the reliable one. I'm the person people come to when they need a problem solved without a fuss, the one who knows which city official prefers a phone call over an email. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, I'd love to hear where in the world you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays are usually the quietest days of the week. The frantic energy of Monday has settled, and the midweek rush hasn't quite hit yet. I had just finished organizing the digital archives for the River North project, a massive residential complex that had been my primary focus for 6 months. My eyes were feeling a bit heavy from staring at the blue light of the monitor, the rows of data beginning to blur into a single, shimmering wall of text. I decided I needed a walk to the supply closet at the far end of the hall to grab a fresh box of heavy-duty staples, a task I could have easily asked an intern to do, but I wanted the movement. I wanted to feel the carpet beneath my feet and the air circulation of the hallway. The hallway was quiet. Most of the team was in a design chairette in the main conference room, debating the merits of terracotta versus limestone for a new facade in the West Loop. As I rounded the corner toward the executive suites, I noticed Arthur's door was cracked open. Usually, if Arthur is in a meeting, that door is sealed tight. He values his privacy, he likes the gravitas of a closed door. I slowed my pace, not because I was trying to be quiet, but because I was looking at a framed photograph on the wall that had gone slightly crooked. I'm a perfectionist, I can't help it. My brain simply cannot process a tilted horizon line without trying to fix it. I reached out to straighten the frame, a black and white shot of the Chicago skyline in 1920, all soot and ambition, and that's when the voices from Arthur's office drifted out into the hall. It was Arthur and Sarah. Sarah is our HR director, a woman I've gone to lunch with every Tuesday for the last 4 years. We've shared stories about our families, our dating disasters, and our shared love for vintage jazz. I considered her more than a colleague, I considered her a confidant. I just don't know if we're doing her any favors by keeping it a secret anymore, Sarah said. Her voice sounded heavy, stripped of the light, professional tone she usually used in the office. It was a voice of weary concern. We agreed, Sarah, Arthur replied. His voice was lower, gravelly, the way it gets when he's tired of a conversation. She's the heart of this place. If she knew the truth about why she was hired, about the arrangement with her father, she'd feel like every achievement she's had here was a handout. And we both know that isn't true. But the foundation of it, it's complicated. I froze. My hand was still on the picture frame. The cool glass felt like ice against my fingertips. My breath hitched in my throat, trapped by a sudden, sharp pressure in my chest. She's 32, Arthur, Sarah continued. She spent her entire adult life here. She thinks she's here because she was the best candidate in 2015. She doesn't know she was the only candidate we were allowed to consider. If she finds out we've been subsidizing her salary through the legacy trust instead of the company payroll, she'll be devastated. I felt a strange sensation, like the floor beneath my feet had suddenly turned into water. I wasn't falling, but I was no longer steady. The solid ground of my career, the pride I took in my paycheck, the very walls of the building seemed to shimmer and dissolve. My father. My father had been a structural engineer, a man who believed in steel and concrete and the absolute truth of gravity. He passed away when I was 24, just as I was finishing my master's degree. He had worked with Arthur years ago, back when the firm was just starting out in a cramped office over a dry cleaners. I always thought they were just old colleagues who respected one another. When I got the job at Sterling and Vance 6 months after his funeral, I felt like it was a sign, a way to stay connected to his world, a way to make him proud even though he wasn't there to see it. I had worked so hard to prove I deserved to be there. I stayed late. I took on the projects no one else wanted, the remediation of old brownfields, the bureaucratic nightmares of zoning disputes. I earned my promotions through sweat and precision. Or so I thought. The trust is running low, Arthur said, his voice closer to the door now. I pulled my hand back from the frame and stepped back into the shadows of the alcove where the water cooler sat. The gurgle of the water felt deafeningly loud. In 2 years, we'll have to transition her fully to the firm's overhead. We need to decide if we tell her then, or if we just let the lie continue. It's not a lie, Arthur, Sarah whispered. It's a protection. We promised him she'd always have a home here. We promised him she'd never have to worry. He wanted her to have a life without the fear of the floor falling out from under her. I heard the sound of a chair sliding across the floor. They were getting up. I didn't think, I just moved. I turned and walked quickly, silently, back toward my desk. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a dull, rhythmic thud that seemed to echo in the empty hallway. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I sat down in my ergonomic chair. Everything looked exactly the same. My coffee mug, the one with the logo of a bookstore I love, was still half full, a thin film of cream forming on the surface. My computer screen was still displaying the River North spreadsheets, thousands of cells of data that now felt like fiction. The sun was still shining on the Willis Tower, casting that same golden light. But the girl sitting in the chair felt like a total stranger. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, just a little. I had spent 8 years believing I was a self-made woman in a competitive city. I believed I was the reliable one because of my talent and my work ethic. Instead, I was a charity project. I was a promise made to a dying man, a legacy piece preserved in amber. I didn't cry. I don't think I could have if I tried. I just sat there, listening to the normal office sounds, the whir of the printer, the distant laughter from the conference room as the architects finished their meeting, the click-clack of keyboards. For the first time in my life, the office felt too small. The walls felt like they were leaning in, pressing against me with the weight of 8 years of protection. Every compliment I'd ever received, every well done, Elena, from Arthur, now sounded like a pitying pat on the head. I looked at my phone. It was 3:15 p.m. I had 2 hours left in the workday. Usually, those 2 hours would fly by in a blur of emails and phone calls. Today, they felt like an eternity. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the world to realize I didn't belong here. Time didn't move forward, it just hovered, heavy and unmoving. I saw Sarah walk past my desk a few minutes later. She smiled at me, that warm, genuine smile she always gave. Heading out for coffee, Elena? You look like you could use a break. You've been staring at that screen for hours. I looked up at her. I searched her eyes for the secret. I searched for the pity. Now that I knew it was there, I could see it. It was hidden in the softness of her expression, the way she always checked in on me a little more than she did with the others. She wasn't my friend, she was my warden. No, I'm okay, I said. My voice sounded thin, like paper. Just a long afternoon. A lot of numbers to crunch. Well, don't work too hard, she said, patting the corner of my desk before walking away. I watched her go. I wondered how many other people in this office knew. Did Marcus in accounting know? Was that why he was always so patient when I made a mistake on a reimbursement form, even though he was a stickler for rules with everyone else? Did the architects know? Was that why they never pushed back when I corrected their timelines? Was I the office mascot, the one they all had to be nice to because the boss was playing a long game of debt repayment to a dead friend? The home they had built for me suddenly felt like a cage. A very comfortable, very expensive cage, built with the best intentions and lined with the memory of my father. I realized then that I didn't know who I was outside of these walls. I had been Elena from Sterling and Vance for so long that I hadn't noticed the world outside had kept moving. I had tied my identity to a company that saw me as a liability covered by a trust fund. I stayed until 5 p.m. I didn't want anyone to notice anything was wrong. I filed the last of the paperwork for the River North permits. I shut down my computer. I cleared my desk, aligning my pens and notebooks with a precision that felt mocking. As I walked out of the building and into the cool Chicago evening, the wind hit me hard. It was a sharp, biting wind coming off the lake, the kind that makes you tuck your chin into your scarf and hurry for the train. But I didn't hurry. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching the people rush past me. They looked so purposeful. I wondered how many of them were living a lie. The commute home on the blue line was a blur of steel-gray shadows and the rhythmic screech of the tracks. Usually, I used this time to decompress, scrolling through news headlines or planning my dinner. But tonight, the faces of the strangers pressed around me felt like a mirror to my own sudden anonymity. Who were these people? Did they earn the seats they sat in, the bags they carried, the lives they were heading home to? Or were they all, like me, living inside a story someone else had written for them? I felt untethered, like a balloon whose string had just been cut. When I stepped into my apartment in Lincoln Park, the silence felt heavy. I've lived here for 5 years. It's a one-bedroom with high ceilings, exposed brick, and a small balcony that looks out over a quiet, tree-lined street. I love this place. Or, I thought I did. Now, as I set my keys on the wooden console table, a piece I'd bought with my first promotion bonus, I wondered if that bonus had even been real. Was it just more money from my father's trust, moved from one account to another to make me feel successful? Was my entire lifestyle a gift from a man who had been gone for nearly a decade? I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the dim space to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, my movements mechanical and cold. I sat at my small dining table and looked at the framed photograph of my father that sat on the bookshelf, nestled between my architectural history books. He was smiling in the photo, wearing his favorite worn-out flannel shirt, standing in front of a half-finished bridge project in Indiana. He looked so sturdy. So certain. My father was a man who believed in the dignity of work. Elena, he used to say, his voice thick with the accent of the rural Midwest, the world doesn't owe you a living, but it owes you a fair shake if you're willing to sweat for it. I felt a lump form in my throat, a physical ache of confusion. If he believed that, why had he done this? Why had he bypassed the very struggle he claimed was necessary for character? Had he looked at me, his only daughter, and seen someone who wouldn't be able to make it on her own? Was his final act of love actually a vote of no confidence? Did he think I was too fragile for the fair shake he'd talked about? The thought hurt more than the idea of Sarah and Arthur keeping a secret. It felt like a fundamental shift in my own history. Every memory of him now felt tainted by this revelation. I spent the night tossing and turning, the sheets tangling around my legs like vines. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Arthur's voice, "She's the heart of this place. If she knew the truth, she'd be devastated." The next morning, the alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., just like always. I went through the motions, showered, dressed in a charcoal blazer and tailored trousers, did my hair. I looked like the senior project coordinator for Sterling and Vance. I looked like a woman who had her life together. But as I applied my lipstick, I didn't recognize the eyes looking back at me in the mirror. They looked harder, sharper. Walking back into the office that morning was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The lobby smelled of the same floor wax and expensive lilies. The security guard, Leo, gave me his usual tip of the cap. "Morning, Miss Elena. Looking sharp today." That's a power suit if I ever saw one. "Thanks, Leo," I managed to say. My voice felt like it was coming from a long way off. I wondered if Leo knew. Did everyone in the building know about the legacy girl? I took the elevator up to the 14th floor. When the doors chimed and opened, the first person I saw was Marcus from accounting. He was standing by the mailroom, flipping through a stack of invoices. "Hey, Elena," he called out, his tone easy and bright. "I got those adjustments for the River North project. I'll swing by your desk later to go over them? I think we can shave off a few thousand on the subcontractor fees if we play our cards right." I looked at him, really looked at him. Marcus had been at the firm for 6 years. He was talented, but he worked twice as hard as anyone else because he had 3 kids and a mortgage in the suburbs. He took the train for 90 minutes every day. I wondered if he was being subsidized. I wondered if he had a legacy trust. Deep down, I knew he didn't. He was here because he was needed. He was here because if he didn't do his job, the firm lost money. If I didn't do my job, the trust just sat there. "Sure, Marcus. See you then," I said, forced a smile, and kept walking. My office felt like a stage set. I reached my desk and sat down. My inbox was already filling up. There was a request from the junior architects for a site visit schedule, a message from a vendor about a delayed shipment of Italian marble for a penthouse project, and a lunch invite from Sarah. "Hey lady. Usual spot at 12:30? My treat today, I have some gossip about the holiday party plans. I think Arthur's going all out this year." Usually, I would have replied with a "can't wait" and a smiley face. Today, I just stared at the screen. "My treat," she had said. Was it her treat? Or was it the trust's treat? I felt a sudden, sharp surge of resentment, a hot flash of anger that startled me. I pushed it down. I couldn't let them see. Not yet. I needed more than just overheard words. I needed proof. I spent the morning immersed in the Italian marble delay. It was a genuine problem. The shipment was stuck in customs because of a paperwork error by the supplier, and the client was starting to get restless. This wasn't a protected task, this was a fire that needed putting out. I made 3 phone calls, navigated a complex web of logistics, and finally secured a release for the crates by leveraging a contact I'd made at the port 2 years ago. It was good work. It was the kind of thing I was famous for, staying calm and finding the needle in the haystack. For a few minutes, I felt a flicker of the old me. I felt capable. I felt like the woman who earned her salary. But then, as I logged the confirmation number into our system, the thought returned like a dark cloud: would they have let someone else handle this? Or was I given these tasks just to keep me busy, to make the charity look like a career? Was I just playing office? At 12:30, I met Sarah at the little bistro around the corner. It was a sunny, crisp day, the kind where the Chicago wind feels refreshing rather than punishing. We sat at our usual table near the window, watching the fashionistas of the Gold Coast walk by. Sarah was mid-story about her nephew's soccer game when she stopped and looked at me, her head tilted to the side, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Elena? You're awfully quiet today. Is everything okay? You haven't even touched your salad. That goat cheese is usually your favorite." I looked down at the goat cheese and roasted beets. It looked like a painting, but I had no appetite. "Just a lot on my mind, Sarah. That marble shipment was a headache. Customs is getting stricter every month." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her touch was warm, and for a second, I wanted to pull away as if I'd been burned. "You always fix it, though. Arthur was just saying this morning in the partners' meeting how much of a pillar you are to this firm. He says we'd be lost without you. He really relies on your organizational mind." The words felt like a physical weight. A pillar. A pillar built on a foundation of secrets. A pillar that didn't actually support any of the weight of the building. "That's nice of him to say," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "Sarah, can I ask you something? About when I was hired? I've been thinking about the past a lot lately." I saw a tiny flicker in her eyes, a micro-expression of tension that vanished as quickly as it appeared. She was a professional, after all. "Of course. What about it? That was ages ago. You were so nervous in your interview, remember? You had that little notebook and 3 different pens." "I was just thinking about my dad lately," I said, picking at a beat. He and Arthur were close, weren't they? I sometimes wonder if Arthur hired me just because he felt he owed my father a favor. You know, since I was fresh out of school and the market was so tight back then. Sarah didn't miss a beat. She took a sip of her sparkling water, her expression perfectly composed, a mask of professional kindness. Arthur respected your father immensely, Elena. They were old school. But Arthur doesn't do favors when it comes to the quality of this firm. He hired you because you were the right fit. Your resume was impeccable. And you've proven him right every day since. Don't let imposter syndrome get to you, honey. You're here because you belong here. It was a perfect answer. Professional, kind, and, I now knew, completely incomplete. She was a professional at this. She had been protecting me for years, shielding me from the truth of my own existence. I'm glad to hear that, I lied. The taste of the lie was bitter. The rest of the lunch was a struggle. I listened to her talk about the holiday party, about the new interns, about her weekend plans at her lake house. I realized that my entire social architecture was built on this one place. My best friend was my HR director. My mentor was a man who was essentially my secret benefactor. If I pulled the thread on this secret, the whole tapestry of my life would unravel. I'd be left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a master's degree I wasn't sure was worth the paper it was printed on. When we walked back to the office, the sun was hitting the glass buildings again, creating a blinding glare. I looked up at the 14th floor. I thought about the files in Arthur's office. I thought about the legacy trust. I needed to see it for myself. I couldn't just live with the ghost of a conversation I'd overheard. I needed the cold, hard facts. I needed to know the numbers. I needed to know exactly how much of my life was mine and how much was a gift I never asked for. I needed to see my father's signature on the betrayal. I spent the afternoon waiting. I watched the clock. I watched Arthur's door. He left for a dinner meeting with a group of developers at 4:30 p.m. Sarah left shortly after to pick up her kids from practice. The office began to thin out as the early winter darkness settled over the city, the lights of the skyscrapers beginning to twinkle like distant stars. I stayed at my desk, pretending to be deep in a project report. I typed nonsense into a Word document just to keep the screen active. By 6 p.m., the floor was mostly empty, save for the cleaning crew at the other end of the hall, the rhythmic hum of their vacuums providing a strange, industrial soundtrack to my nerves. My heart was racing as I stood up. I felt like a criminal, even though I was just seeking the truth about my own life. I walked toward the executive suites. The hallway was dimly lit, the motion sensor lights clicking on with a sharp clack as I passed, exposing me in their cold, fluorescent glow. Arthur's door was locked this time. But I knew where he kept the spare key. It wasn't in some high-tech safe, it was in the bottom of the faux ivy plant stand next to the door, a relic of his open-door policy that he only used when he forgot his own keys or when the cleaning crew needed access. I reached into the dirt of the planter, my fingers trembling. My nail snagged on the small plastic baggie. I pulled it out, my heart in my throat. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it softly behind me. The office smelled of cedar, expensive cigars, and old paper. It was a masculine, heavy scent. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I didn't want to alert the security downstairs. Instead, I used the flashlight on my phone, the beam cutting through the darkness like a blade. I went straight to the credenza behind his desk. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. I felt like the air in the room was being sucked out. I began to look for the legacy trust files. I went through the L section, then the T. Nothing. I tried P for my father's name. Nothing. Then, I saw a folder at the very back of the drawer, tucked behind the tax returns from 5 years ago. It was a simple manila folder with no name on the tab. Just a date, October 12, 2015. The month I was hired. I opened it. Inside were bank statements, a copy of a legal agreement, and a handwritten letter. I sat in Arthur's oversized leather chair, a chair that usually made me feel small, but now made me feel powerful in a dark, twisted way, and began to read. The numbers on the statements were clear and undeniable. Every month, For 8 years, a transfer had been made from an account titled the Miller Legacy Fund into the firm's payroll account. The amount matched my salary and benefits, almost to the penny. Every raise I'd received, every bonus, it was all there, funded by the fund. Then, I read the letter. It was on my father's stationery, the one with the embossed bridge logo at the top. The handwriting was shaky, the lines sloping downward. He must have written it in the final weeks of his illness, when the cancer was taking his strength. "Arthur," it began. "I know what I'm asking is unconventional. But Elena has a heart that's too big for the world sometimes. She's brilliant, but she's cautious. She won't take risks unless she feels safe. I'm leaving her the money, but if I give it to her all at once, she'll just save it and stay small. I want her to have a career. I want her to feel the pride of a paycheck she thinks she earned. Use this fund to cover her. Give her the space to grow without the fear of failing. Let her believe she's doing it on her own, until she's strong enough not to need the lie anymore. Treat her like your own, Arthur. Make her believe in herself." The phone light flickered against the paper, making the words dance. I felt a hot, stinging tear finally roll down my cheek. Then another. He didn't do it because he doubted my intelligence. He did it because he was afraid for my spirit. He thought he was giving me a fair shake by removing the fear of failing. He thought he was helping me fly by building a safety net so large I'd never even know it was there. He wanted to buy me the confidence he thought I lacked. But in doing so, he had stolen my chance to actually fail. To struggle. To know for sure that I was good enough to survive on my own. He had turned my life into a simulation, a gilded cage where the stakes weren't real. I closed the folder. I put it back exactly where I found it, making sure the edges aligned with the other files. I locked the door and replaced the key in the planter, wiping the dirt from my hands. I walked out of the office, down the elevator, and out into the Chicago night. I didn't go to the train. I just started walking. I walked for miles, past the bright lights of Michigan Avenue, where the tourists were taking photos of the holiday displays, down toward the lake. The water was black and restless, whitecaps catching the moonlight. I stood by the railing at the edge of the concrete path, the wind whipping my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. I realized then that Arthur and Sarah weren't the villains of this story. They were just people trying to keep a promise to a dying friend. They had sacrificed their own honesty to fulfill a man's final wish. And my father wasn't a villain either. He was just a man who loved his daughter too much to let her face the wind alone. He was a builder who tried to build a life that wouldn't break. But I was 32 years old. And it was time to find out if I could stand on my own 2 feet without a safety net I never asked for. I needed to know if I was a project coordinator or just a project. The walk home from the lake that night was the longest of my life. The city lights seemed to flicker with a different frequency, or maybe it was just the clarity of my own vision. By the time I reached my apartment, the anger had mostly faded, replaced by a strange, hollow clarity. I didn't go to bed right away. I sat on my balcony, even though it was freezing, and watched the tail lights of the cars on Lakeshore Drive, a river of red light flowing into the distance. I thought about my father's hands, rough, calloused, always smelling of engine oil and old blueprints. He was a builder. He believed in foundations. He had spent his whole life making sure things didn't fall down. I realized then that he had treated me like one of his projects. He had reinforced me, underpinned me, and buttressed me because he was terrified that my own spirit wouldn't be enough to hold up the weight of the world. He didn't trust the materials he had created. It was a beautiful, tragic mistake. The next morning, I didn't wake up feeling like a victim. I woke up feeling like a woman who had finally been given a map. I knew exactly where I was, and for the first time, I knew exactly where I needed to go. I arrived at the office early. I made the coffee, the smell of the beans filling the quiet break room. I checked the mail. I greeted Leo at the front desk with a genuine smile, a smile of someone who was no longer afraid of what he might see. I felt a weird sense of affection for everything, the squeaky wheel on the mail cart, the humming fluorescent light in the break room, the way the sun hit the conference table. These things had been my life for 8 years. They were real, even if the way I'd gotten there was complicated. I had done the work. The work was mine, even if the money wasn't. At 10 a.m., I knocked on Arthur's door. He was on the phone, debating a zoning issue, but he waved me in, signaling for me to sit. He looked older this morning. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. Maybe I was just looking closer, seeing the man instead of the myth. Elena, he said, hanging up the phone and leaning back in his chair. What can I do for you? Sarah mentioned you were a bit quiet at lunch yesterday. I hope she didn't bore you with soccer stories again. Everything okay? I looked at him, the man who had carried a secret for a decade just to keep a promise to a friend. I felt a wave of gratitude and sadness. Arthur, I said softly. I wanted to thank you. He blinked, a look of genuine confusion crossing his face. Thank me? For what? You're the one who saved that marble shipment. For everything, I said. For the job. For the mentorship. For being a friend to my father. But mostly, for looking out for me when I didn't know I needed it. He went very still. The air in the room seemed to tighten, the hum of the city outside fading away. He's a smart man, he didn't try to play dumb. He looked at my eyes, and he saw the knowledge there. He saw that the secret was out. He let out a long, slow breath and rubbed his temples, a gesture of profound exhaustion. How long have you known? He asked. His voice was barely a whisper, stripped of its usual authority. Since Tuesday, I said. I heard you and Sarah talking near the suite. And last night? I found the folder. I read the letter. Arthur looked down at his desk, his hands clasped together. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Elena, I am so sorry. Your father, he was so worried. He was dying, and all he could think about was you. He didn't want you to ever feel the pressure of a layoff or a bad economy. He wanted you to have the freedom to just be. To do your work without the fear that keeps so many people awake at night. He thought he was giving you a gift. I know, I said. I read the letter. I know it came from a place of pure love. But Arthur, you can't build a person the way you build a skyscraper. You can't just add extra support beams and expect them to learn how to stand in a storm. Strength comes from the struggle, not the safety. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with a mix of regret and something that looked like genuine pride. You're a hell of a project coordinator, Elena. Trust me when I say the money was just the background noise. It was just numbers on a page. The work you did? That was all you. Every permit you fought for, every client you managed, every project you saved from the brink. You earned your place here 10 times over. I would have hired you without the trust, but I was bound by my word to him. Maybe, I said. But I'll never really know that as long as I'm here, will I? Every time I look at my paycheck, I'll see his ghost. Every time you praise me, I'll wonder if you're just fulfilling a contract. So, what happens now? He asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out a white envelope. I had written it last night, sitting on my balcony in the cold. I placed it on his desk, right over the spot where the folder had been. It was my resignation, effective immediately. I'm going to find a job where I don't know the CEO's favorite jazz record, I said with a small smile, my voice gaining strength. A job where no one promised my father anything. I need to know what happens when there's no safety net. I need to know if I can build something from the ground up, with my own hands. Arthur didn't try to talk me out of it. He didn't offer me more money or a different title. He stood up, walked around the desk, and did something he'd never done in 8 years. He gave me a hug. It wasn't a boss's hug, it was a goodbye from a man who was finally letting go of a burden he'd carried for a friend. It was an acknowledgement of my adulthood. He'd be so proud of you right now, Arthur whispered into my hair. He'd be terrified for you, because that's who he was, but he'd be so incredibly proud. I spent the rest of the morning saying my goodbyes. I didn't tell anyone the truth. I didn't want to tarnish their memories or make them feel guilty. I just told them I'd received an offer I couldn't refuse, an opportunity to lead a new department at a firm across town. Which was true, in a way. I was offering myself a new life, a new department of one. When I got to Sarah's office, she was already crying. She didn't even ask why. She just saw my face and knew. You're going to be amazing, Elena, she said, hugging me tight, her tears dampening my blazer. You always were. We were just too scared to let you see it. We thought we were helping, but we were just holding you back. I walked out of Sterling and Vance at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday. I didn't have a new job lined up. I didn't have a plan beyond going home and updating my resume with the skills I now knew were mine and mine alone. I had 8 years of experience, a folder full of successful projects, and a heart that was no longer afraid of the wind. As I walked toward the train, the wind was howling through the canyons of the loop, swirling bits of paper and dust. It was cold, and it was loud, and it was completely indifferent to who I was or where I was going. It was the real world. For the first time in my life, I didn't mind the cold. I didn't need the shelter of a legacy. I realized that my father was right about one thing: I did have a big heart. But he was wrong about it being too big for the world. My heart was exactly the right size to carry the weight of my own life, the joys and the failures alike. I stopped at a small, cluttered coffee shop I'd never been to before. I sat by the window, on a wobbly stool, and watched the people of Chicago rush by. I felt a quiet, steady strength rising up inside me, like a new foundation being poured. I wasn't the girl who was protected anymore. I was a woman who had finally been seen, by herself. I took out a notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of the first page, my handwriting firm and clear: Elena Miller, Senior Project Coordinator. Experienced, reliable, and ready for whatever comes next. I looked at the words until the ink was dry and the sun began to dip behind the buildings. Then, I closed the book, finished my coffee, and stepped back out into the wind. I wasn't eavesdropping anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It's been a journey of reflection and quiet strength, and I hope it resonated with you. If you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to comment below to let me know where you're watching from. It means the world to have you here. Until next time.